Welcome to Leadership in Action, the podcast where we explore bold ideas, impactful leadership, and the people shaping the future of business across the Caribbean. I'm your host, Amrita. I'm the Chief Projects Officer of Action Invest Caribbean, Inc. And today's episode features a powerful conversation with Mr. Brenden Glasford. Brenden is an attorney at law, registered patent and trademark agent, and the driving force behind LIP Advisory. In this episode, we're going to look into the intersection of law, leadership, and local empowerment, exploring how Guyana's local content legislation is creating new opportunities, and of course, what business leaders need to understand about this new era. So let's jump into the conversation. Mr. Glasford, it's such a pleasure to welcome you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And could you tell me more about what inspired your journey in law and what made you pursue this path?
Well, it wasn't so much inspiration. So I come from a family of lawyers. So it just seemed like something at a young age that I could do because that's what I was surrounded by. I wasn't a particular. As a child, I didn't particularly like to argue. I often hear people say when, they talk about wanting to become a lawyer that you want to argue, but it's just something that I thought was a possibility based on the family that I was around, right? Hearing about legal conversations and points from a young age. So that's pretty much it.
That makes sense. So it was that familial connection that really brought you into this field.
Yes.
And you found that it's something that you've grown to really love.
Yes. I used to spend, so on vacations, I used to go to my grandfather's law offices and help him organize cases. When I get older, I started to read cases. It's just about, the environment
I understand.
I grew up in.
And how did your early career experiences shape the type of lawyer and consultant that you are today?
I would say that when I started off as a lawyer, everyone kind of gravitates toward litigation and courtroom work. But I realized quite early on that I liked more of the advisory work, right, and the written advocacy. I did my time as an advocate. I even spent a 6-month stint as a magistrate, doing criminal litigation. So I realized that my interest was more with the advisory work and writing, and most of law now, right, except criminal law, is statutory interpretation, right? You have to determine what the correct interpretation of the law is to advise your clients on any particular thing. And with the start of our oil and gas industry here in Guyana, clients, the type of work that people wanted changed, right? It became more about business compliance, corporate compliance, tax advisory, and understanding how to navigate the business landscape here, right?
I see. And I'm also particularly interested there how you mentioned what people are most drawn to when it comes to litigation in Guyana. And you can see that case law in the judicial system is something that is more coveted because it's more in demand. So what I want to know is what drew you to specialize in legal, tax, and business consulting?
Well, that is I have spent most of my career, right, doing litigation, right? But I realized after the implementation of the Local Content Act that, with the provisions and people having to comply with the Local Content Act, right? The Companies Act for corporate compliance, the income tax, the corporation tax, property and capital gains, that there was a greater need, and there was a greater need for advisory work, and that people, lawyers and litigants are more focused on litigation. As you mentioned, it's coveted. I think that there is still a perception, right, that that's all that lawyers do, right? They go in the courtroom and argue. But that's not the case anymore, right? There are a lot of lawyers doing quiet advisory work. It never sees the light of day, but it makes a big impact in relation to guidance of your clients and successful business ventures moving forward in Guyana.
Excellent. I think that is something that more businesses and professionals need to hear. So, could you share a turning point in your career that really changed your leadership in this field?
Right. I view leadership, at least the definition that I follow, right? It's providing guidance towards a common goal, right? So, a lawyer's job primarily, right, is to provide guidance, right, in one form or another, right? Whether it is advising the client of the type of deal that has to be structured, the laws that have to comply with, the type of advocacy you're proposing, right? I mean, the client has to sign off on it, but primarily what the lawyer provides is guidance towards whatever goal the client wants, or the outcome. And I think that for myself, a big turning point was realizing that there is not enough of the advisory work, the advisory content out there about how the business architecture and the legal architecture here works, right? And that's it's not the most glamorous thing, right? You're not getting somebody off for murder or a crime, or you might not be keeping a family together, right? The outcome does not seem as great, but in terms of the lasting outcome to the economy, right, to people's jobs, to businesses, it does have a greater outcome over the long term. It's not as glamorous, right? It doesn't catch the headlines. You're not going to see lawyer advises company about how to issue shares or debentures, but those are the things that keep businesses alive and moving.
I understand. I've been considering too how in Guyana, one of the key social changes that we need around the legal landscape is to not romanticize, let's say, those professions that have more to do with criminal than with business. Yeah. So, what I'd like to hear more from you from as well is what it means to be ethical within the legal landscape that we're in.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that you face from the time you come into practice, and there are courses when you become a lawyer teaching you about the ethics of the profession, and it will interest you to know that there's a Legal Practitioners Act, and at the end of that act, there's a schedule that kind of goes through things you should and should not do as a lawyer. But I think one of the most basic tenets with ethical guidance as a lawyer is to not oversell a position, or to let a client think that something is possible when it's not. So it comes down to you being able to set out a picture without embellishment of what is possible to the client. I think that's where it starts because, once you've oversold what is possible, it's hard to pull it back, right? Or to then go and say, what I told you initially, it may not be. You always have to temper people's expectations, and that's a big part of guidance.
I see. And I understand that there may be some conflicting interests of law, business, and client advocacy. So, can you tell me more about how you help to manage that conflict among Guyanese people and their businesses?
There are rules about conflict of interest in relation to how you're to deal with some transactions, right? So acting for both sides, right, without informing both sides of the possible conflict of interest, without getting a written release from both sides to do so, them understanding what the situation is. It's probably one of the primary things that happens a lot with property transactions, where both sides may want the same lawyer, right? The lawyer stands to gain a lot from it. So, but you don't want there's a balance that has to be kept, and that's why I mentioned, explaining to both sides the legal consequence of this, right? Getting something in writing if they do want to move forward, understanding the consequences that you're acting for both sides, and that you cannot give favor to one side over another. At least you're not supposed to. But that is the main type of conflict of interest I see, which is acting for both sides of a transaction. It is this is a particularly tricky issue because one of the ways to protect your interests in confidential matters is through what we call a non-disclosure agreement. Sometimes you may have an idea, right, which is confidential, maybe patentable, maybe trademarkable, and in the early days before you start off your venture, right, you want to seek advice. You may wish to seek funding, and you don't want your information to get out into the public, right? And that's a key part of it. There are a few things that you have to be aware of. One of them is that the information that you want to protect cannot be in the public domain. So if you're kind of loose about how you're giving out this information, you can't really protect the confidentiality of it. Second, bargaining power. I think people don't often think in these terms that. So when you go to a bank and you say, I want funding for this, you have to disclose your business plan, etc. Do you have the leverage or the bargaining power to have a bank sign an NDA for that? Who you're going to, do you have the bargaining power, right? The leverage. Can you get them to sign an NDA? It's not always the case. There is a lot. I found in our society there is, a big power differential or power gap. So if the person has more bargaining power, if you're coming to them and you don't have as much leverage, I don't think they'll agree to it. Also, when you do get to the point of being ready to launch your venture, you do want to think about patenting is not such a big issue here, right? I've never seen too many patents coming out again. I don't think we have too many inventors, but trademarking is, right? If you go through the official gazette on a weekly basis, every company coming into this country, right? From the airlines to everything else, whether they sell something recognizable or not, they go through the process of trademarking the what they're going to use, right, for their brand. And that should give Guyanese an indication of how important it is to look after that before you start. Don't wait for somebody to to try and pass off their product as yours before you look at protecting the symbol, the words, right, the brand that you're building. So take it as a sign that these multi-million, multi-billion dollar businesses are doing it, and start to do it as well.
Great. And I'm really excited about the opportunities for Guyanese businesses to get more involved in patenting as well as trademarking. We see that those are relatively untouched. And I think it's also important that we uncover some of the misconceptions around tax planning too, as it comes to staying ethical. So, what advice do you have for Guyanese businesses there?
Okay, so I think you know, compliance and planning of any sort is not something that has generally been, I don't think it is part of our business culture, right? It is starting to become because we have to deal with, multinational companies, but it has not been. So it's a fairly new concept to people, right? I don't know if you've ever attended these events at Center for Local Business Development, but most of the times when the bank's going to talk, you'll hear the representatives saying that, when you're seeking a loan, you don't bring one set of books, right? Tell us verbally that your expenses, your income, your cash flow are one set of thing, but then the books don't substantiate it. And I think there is a culture that you know we've got to hide what we have. It's becoming a bigger issue now because corporate compliance and tax planning are bigger with the people who Guyanese companies are dealing with. So the standard is not being born here, but it is coming in from outside Guyana. In terms of tax and corporate planning, it is something that any Guyanese business that wants to evolve in terms of their clientele, in terms of their income, perhaps wants to work outside Guyana, right? Because at some point, a lot of our businesses are not even regional, right? I can't think of too many examples, but you know, at some point, our businesses will have to grow, and the only way to do that, right, other than the proper incentives, is by being compliant, right? And that's a big part of bankability of projects, right? Your corporate governance. Are you trying to hide money, profits? Are you running your business like an ATM, right? Personal ATM. Do you deal with your obligations in a timely manner and properly, right? Whether they be corporate compliance or tax planning, right? There have been some, so and Jamaica has had some success stories with raising up its companies. I think the IBC person in charge of their stock exchange, I can't remember her name, but she was at the conference, and there's a book she has about corporate governance. But what Jamaica's been able to do with its junior stock exchange and bringing up those companies with you know well structured tax incentives. But to benefit from that, you have to be compliant with your taxes, right? You have to plan ahead what's going to happen, and that's something that there has to be a a mindset shift with more businesses here.
Right. And I've also been thinking that it can seem intimidating for businesses in the local context to implement a tax strategy.
Yeah.
So, how do you think that they can implement not only a tax strategy, but also focus on business growth as well as compliance?
So understanding, right, your tax burden. There's some fundamental concepts that Having an advisor is good, right? But there's some fundamental concept that the business owner, right, has to understand, or else, the people who you are trusting to look after your professional advice, you need to understand at least some of the language they're speaking, so that at the end of the day, the burden lays with you, not the person who is giving you the advice, right? Because at the end of the day, you are going to be, held accountable for it. So understanding at a fundamental level, what the if you have a company, what the corporate tax burden is, right? What the year of assessment is, what the year of income is. There's some fundamental things that you have to understand, right? And you go from there. When you have that fundamental understanding, having a conversation with a tax advisor or a corporate advisor becomes simpler. Some of the right questions to ask, and you have a fair idea of whether they're doing what they're supposed to or not.
How would you approach then advising startups as opposed to more established enterprises?
Also, it is very different advising a company is just starting as opposed to a company that has been in business for a while. Their needs are different, right? So at the beginning, you need more structure. So you need to know, you need to have an understanding of what this business structure that you're getting into, or what the fundamentals of it are, right? How it works, how the organization works, what is required in terms of officers, positions, if you have a company, having a board in place, issuing shares. So, once you get past that first year, right, of having a board in place, filing your first annual return, holding your first AGM as a company, your needs become different, because you may be looking then at more funding issues or more tax compliance issues, because those things start to come up after the first year. So, the startup, what you have to advise about is significantly different. It's more about structure and setting up the correct systems for success. Where a little later down the line, you're looking at compliance issues, bankability of project issues, funding, HR, employment issues, contractual issues. It's going to be an issue at the beginning, as it will be later. But the issues become more nuanced and complex the longer you're in business.
I understand. Well, of course, without naming names, there will be some anonymity involved. But is there any piece of case law that you can share with us about the Guyanese landscape where maybe a tax or a legal strategy was useful, maybe a game changer for that client?
One of the things that you frequently see, or a lot of the issues that crop up with business in Guyana, relate to labor law, right? So our labor laws are quite old, and they call for a lot of regulations from whatever minister's in charge of the sector at the time. And you're looking at laws from maybe the 1940s and 1950s that require a lot of additional input, and you don't see those regulations in place, even up to today's date, right? So a big issue with, all employers, whether or all companies, is an issue of the interpretation of the labor laws, because without the regulations, they end up being a bit vague, right? And both employers and employees are not 100% sure with how to treat with them. One other issue that you see quite a lot, and this is with Guyanese indigenous companies specifically, is the lack of shareholding being issued. And when people start up companies, I think that all they have to do is to be the director, appoint a secretary, and that's the end of the road for them. That they have a company or they own a company, and they don't understand that without the shares, if something was to happen to you today, you know, no one can benefit without shares being issued, right? Because shares are movable property, and without having a share issued in a beneficiary's name, right? Your family can't benefit from the work that you've put into that company. And there are a lot of people, who scramble when they're sick to put those things in place.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I've been considering too that there is a lot to take away from companies now implementing this, and a lot of it has to do with globalization of these ideas
Yeah.
and getting more awareness out there about why it is necessary for dividends to be awarded as well as shares. So tell me a bit more about what the Guyanese legal landscape can take away from changes happening in the world.
Um, you know, what you see outside Guyana in terms of corporate compliance, you see companies fail outside Guyana, and there are often consequences for that. Companies here do have to take corporate compliance significantly more seriously. Because when a company is wound up or comes to an end by whatever means, they are employees, right? They're shareholders who have to face the consequences of management's actions, right? And sometimes in Guyana, what you'll find is most times the managements and the shareholders are the same. Outside of Guyana, you will not find that. And there's a big issue here, I believe, with corporate governance in terms of, people, uh, the family company, right? Being managed in a way that can be detrimental to the shareholders and the profits, because I think that I think it is a side effect of our society, which is highly individualist. Um, Everybody wants to be the man on top, and it enters into the boardroom quite a lot, where fights, ego-driven, come into it, and decisions are made that are not in the best interest of the employees, of the shareholders, of the best interest of the company, right? But somebody wanting to prove they're right or prove I'm the boss or the man or the woman on top, right? So I think we do need to move into having, so with these family companies, some independent management, some independent directors who are not part of the family that can bring balance, right, to the views. Again, restructuring corporate governance so that the company is audited ever so often. Remuneration is looked at. The way it is managed is looked at, and those are important things if companies want to grow, develop here, right? They want to be regional or even global. I don't see a reason why companies that we have here can't be, a great number of them can be operating in other jurisdictions, right? With the right mindset, with the right governance structures. I don't see why we can't have that. ambition or goal.
I'd have to agree. I'm seeing a lot of changes too with physical infrastructure. That being said, with also the top of line and supporting structure happening within businesses. I think it's also important that apart from that globalized effect that we have there, how do you think that technology can help us in this sphere?
Well, technology has proven itself, at least in the legal sector, to be a double-edged sword, right? Because you have recently the CCJ issued a directive about use of generative AI with court documents. So in terms of you, a lawyer preparing pleadings or arguments, etc., have given guidance, right? Strict guidance in about its use. Every day, well, not every day, but periodically you see headlines about lawyers being sanctioned because they use AI to draft stuff, right? And the references the AI comes up with are not real, right? So in terms of business, they are things that the kind of run of the mill tasks that we don't like to do as humans. Technology can be very good for, and AI, but there will always be need, right, for at least as I see it in business, for some human supervision, right? It's fine to ask AI to summarize something for you, but you have to double check it. Uh, you know, you have to you have to give it guidance, right, or the final result.
I'm thinking that it is really vital how you touched on the fact that there will still be a lot of human resource that is irreplaceable within the human side of legal consulting, really. So, what do you think that the next generation of leaders in this landscape will need to know?
I think creativity, that is what humans offer. The computer systems cannot necessarily match. They might be able to match a simple degree of it, but any future guidance has to be not in terms of linear thinking, right? But in terms of creative approaches to solving, your legal, your corporate, your tax problems, right? And that comes, I think, from the human mind, right? Being able to look at a document, being able to read those words and come up with a different interpretation or different approach that may be able to convince people that you were correct in your view. And I don't think that AI presently offers that. I don't know if it ever will be able to.
I think that the magnitude of its growth could be such that it gets close to understanding a certain level of what we do, and then we can eventually focus our creativity around things that are far less mundane. And I'd like to see more of that in the legal landscape. And I think while it is necessary for law firms and business consultants to take this as a consideration in the next decade of business, maybe there are some key factors we need to consider before that or post intervention in entering businesses and interacting with people. So tell me what you think that both consulting firms and business consultants need to know about what's happening in the next decade.
In Guyana, I would say so. What happens in the next decade is going to be driven by the kind of by what our economy is doing, and right now, it's oil and gas and supporting services. So, you have seen international franchise coming in, right? And you got to remember, or people have to remember that, when something comes into the environment and changes it, right? There are going to be other fringe effects. So, when oil and gas comes in, You've seen places like Starbucks come in. You're going to see more international franchises because and different types of products coming in because people develop people have more disposable income. They develop different tastes. Um, you know, People who are working in the oil and gas sector who have come from outside of Guyana, they have a, a different quality of life to most Guyanese right before the sector. So they're looking for new entertainment. They're looking for thing, and they're going to be companies that want to come in to meet those needs, right? So you're going to have in the next decade, you're going to have a lot of market entrants, right? Coming in to fill the needs of more disposable income, right? To fill specialized services that come with oil and gas that will look at entertainment and other things that go with increased opportunities and increased quality of life, right? So, and with anything to do with a market entry, you're going to have new joint ventures between Guyanese and foreign companies. So, having your business in a manner which somebody can come and look and say, this is a company that I can have a joint venture with, right? They share our ethos, they share our work ethic, they share our level of compliance. And I think that's been something that has been missing widespread, where companies can just come and say, this is something that I can get involved with. There have been joint ventures here, but there've also been many failed joint ventures, and a lot of that is because of the lack of corporate compliance, the lack of tax compliance, the lack of compatible business culture.
What advice would you give to more legal professionals who are entering this kind of leadership for the first time?
Do not oversell your or don't oversell your client on what's possible. That's the first thing. I mentioned it already. You have to have a very realistic appraisal of what is possible, right? In the current legal architecture. The other thing that I mentioned is about having not a linear approach. So, linear approaches are good in terms of setting out what has to be done. But in terms of advising, you do have to have an open and creative approach to what is there and what's possible. Don't assume that it's not. Be reserved about what is possible, but you still have to explore the, I guess, options of what steps can be taken, right? I I've noticed in Guyanese business culture there is a reservation that if it has not been done, right? You know, not necessarily it can't be done, but you'll. I've had clients who have had this particular issue. They go with a business plan for something that hasn't been done, right? And they'll get questions from financial institutions. If this is such a great idea, why hasn't X person, right, a business leader, done it already? And I think that there is a bit of a block, right? That if it was such a great idea, if this was possible, somebody would have already done it, and that does stop some business ventures from starting until somebody either with the wherewithal to keep pushing, or somebody who is one of the right people, the business leaders, goes and gets the idea, and it becomes a reality.
Great. And I am very enthusiastic about the prospect of more professionals entering this field. And I think it will only continue to grow from here. What are some of those leadership principles that you stand by that you found have often been misunderstood or undervalued?
I so in terms of offering legal guidance, right, or advice, you really your advice has to be grounded in I mean, the client doesn't always want to know, right? And I don't always want you to quote the section of the law, but it can't just be something off the top of your head, right? Which is something you heard or something you think. It has to be based in our legislation, right? And I think that you have to strike the right balance in this field in being able to explain in plain English, and when necessary, giving the client the legalese. And I think that's one of the key things that is make or break as an advisor or consultant. Getting your interpretation right, being able to get it across to the client, having it based in some fact or some law or some practice. So there needs to be a clear understanding of that if you're entering this type of work.
And last but not least, finally, what legacy do you hope to leave as a leader in your field?
I think that I've noticed in my time in the profession and business in Guyana that there is a conception that education stops. When you get that certificate, whether that certificate is a LLB, right, or a bachelor's in something. It's a postgraduate certificate like the one I got when I became a lawyer, LEC, or a master's or a doctorate. But what I have seen is that it doesn't, right? And that kind of mindset stagnation or mental stagnation can be harmful to both you and the people that you're advising, right? Thinking that education stops there. In some parts of the world, in quite a few, there's continuous legal education, right? A certain amount of, well, it depends on where it is, but there's a certain amount of continuous education that you have to do, keeping up to date with the the legislation, decisions, what's happening regionally. And I think that if there is anything that I would want to impart on future lawyers, advisors, consultants, is that you know the the reading never ends, right? The analysis, the thinking about you know what the law is, what the facts are, what this specific problem is. It's continuous, all right? This is not a job where you can turn off your mind when you leave your office or you leave a boardroom or a courtroom. I mean, I suppose it does sound quite intimidating because I think that society, not just here, has lulled itself into believing that, when you go home, you turn off and you go to leisure. But I don't think that's how life works. Because, I knew a guy who always said, there's leave from work, but there's no leave from life. Right? And when you go home, you might have other things to deal with. You might have a family, you might have a spouse, you might have pets, you might have another job to go and do. And you do have to be able to find a way to balance, keeping abreast with what's going on in your field, in addition to the work you have to do. And for some people, that's a terrifying prospect.
I can understand that. I see one of the things that I've been learning time and time again too in my field, projects development, R&D, is that there really is no true work-life balance. It is more so that all of these things we learn on a daily basis start to become harmonious. And I have really felt so deeply engaged in this conversation with you. And I'd like to thank you for providing me and everyone with a deeper understanding of the intricacies of local content, compliance, all of these valuable takeaways, and of course, its impact on regional and national development more so.
Well, it was a pleasure to have the conversation, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our podcast, Leadership in Action. And another heartfelt thank you to our guest, Mr. Brenden Glasford. On behalf on both of us, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. And if you found value in today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your network. Stay connected with us for more conversations that spotlight leaders and innovators driving transformation across the Caribbean. And until next time, stay inspired and keep leading with purpose.